Hey, folks, welcome in. It's another episode of a Nichols Worth. Thank you for joining me here on the show. If you are joining me live, thank you for joining me here on the show. And make sure you give that this post rather a share on your timelines, or make sure you tell somebody about it if you're listening on Instagram as well. Thank you for joining me on this Friday night. I'm your host, Keaton Nichols. You can, of course, join me everywhere on social media. Follow me, whatever, at Keaton D. Nichols, at Keaton D. Nichols. Wait a minute. Let me put the little graphic up there. Pay good money for this graphic right there. At Keaton D. Nichols on Instagram and on Twitter. Make sure you subscribe. And I want to emphasize today to subscribe on YouTube. I think that's what all the kids are doing. It's all the rage. Subscribing on YouTube. We have a YouTube page that's now housing all this content. So if you want a replay of the broadcast, oftentimes even before it's available on Anchor and Spotify and stuff like that, you can go to YouTube and subscribe. Right now, it costs you $0.00. I'm not one of those people that's trying to get like 1 million followers on YouTube, so I won't beat you over the head with it. But today, and today only, it's like a sale, I do want to promote going to the YouTube page. Just search A. Nichols Worth. I hope everyone had a great week. Happy Friday out there to everybody. It's the weekend. It's hard to tell what days are which these days. But anyway, a couple of things I wanted to talk about tonight on the program. Biden goes public. He went public last night. We saw him for the first time in sort of a presidential role, so we'll break all that down. And also got a few headlines regarding the case of Derrick Chauvin, the former police officer that killed George Floyd last summer, and of course sparked off a huge conversation. Before we get going, of course, if you're watching this live, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you can chime in the conversation anytime you would like. I'll do my best to try and read those comments for you throughout the course of the show. And any ones that I forget, I'll get to at the very end. So make sure you do that. All right, so let's get started here because there's a lot that I do want to get to. Some quick thoughts about the Biden speech last night. As we've been talking about this week, if you've been looking at the show or news just in general, or I don't know, the world, everyone kind of knows about the stimulus bill that has been passed this week, the president making it official last night in his address to the country. And just for a second, I mean, there is a bit of transition and adjustment that I have to get through. First, in the fact that it's been 50 days of President Biden, and we haven't seen the sort of flare from the previous president that we formerly did, right? Like constant press conferences, constantly trying to shift and reshift and rewrite the narrative about his presidency. Joe Biden's not really doing that, right? Like he's just kind of like for now, just kind of doing his job, and that's up for criticism on both sides of the ball, of course. But one thing that I think I can appreciate about this moment is that when I saw him last night, I said, look, that's the president of the United States. He sometimes comes and he addresses the nation whenever something like this is very serious. And this is very normal, right? Like this is very regular. He didn't spout off, or he didn't split off into some diatribe about how he actually or secretly won the election, or anything else like that. It was very normal. I enjoyed seeing it. He said what he had to say. He was very straight about it. I mean, politicians, you got to take everything they say with a grain of salt, of course. But, in what he said, his expectations, I have these expectations. I'd like for us to be, kind of in so many words over this thing by July the 4th, by Independence Day. However, he acknowledges during the course of the speech too, we might not get there, maybe, but I'd like to. This is the goal, being realistic about what can be done. It was all very normal and all very regular. I thought that part of it was awesome. That's very good. The other thing that I kind of noticed is there was there was sort of this like we did it mentality that sort of came with the speech, not only last night, but the presser that they did today, the sort of post-congratulate themselves, the Democrats that is, on a bill well done, so to speak. There's a lot of congratulations. We did it. Hey, I made you a promise that we were going to pass, the Democrats were going to pass a stimulus package, and we did that, right? Like Joe Biden really wanted to emphasize that. That's something that, he had noted earlier in the week in an interview. He said, look, man, back in 2009, when Barack and I, because it's his favorite time to talk about, right? When Barack and I rescued the economy back in 2009, we didn't really make a big deal out of it, right? Like, we didn't go up and we didn't take like this victory lap around the United States and say, look how great we are. You all should be kissing the ring because we saved you all's behinds with this bailout package, so to speak. And it wasn't really direct payments to people back then, a little bit different, but that was one of the things that Biden said, look, we should have asked for, not asked for more. We should have gloated about that a little bit more. We should have been a little bit more proud of our successes. And so you could tell already the Biden administration is not going to let the moment pass, to sort of congratulate themselves, to pat themselves on the back and say, we did something productive here. And you all ought to recognize us for that. So that's cool. The other thing, so another thing that I pulled out of this, I was watching a program. Actually, there's two press conferences before I get into that. The second press conference happened today. It was in the Rose Garden. Nancy Pelosi was there. Chuck Schumer was there. The usual suspects for the Democrats were there. Kamala Harris was there. Joe Biden was there. And it was sort of a follow-up on what we heard last night, right? It was all the Democrats just kind of saying, hey, we did a really great job and relief is on the way. Americans, you don't have to be stressed and worried and all this other good stuff. But one thing I noticed, like when Kamala got to the mic, I couldn't help but think to myself, this looks, I mean, we all have our personal opinions about Kamala, but she's the vice president of the United States. She certainly got there by hook or by crook, but she's there. And, she looks a lot more like what the future of the Democratic Party is. Like when I looked at Joe Biden last night and even today, when I saw him, I kind of got this idea that he was like kind of the last of the old guard, if you will. Like there aren't going to be too many guys or people in general like Joe Biden who are going to be representing either party, Democrats, Republicans, moving into the future. Very, very sort of old guard-ish. I think that that's overall good, but the youth revolution, so to speak, that we've been talking about, I've been talking about for years and years, to me needs to be a handoff, right? Like it needs to be the smooth transition. And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of Democrats and a lot of people in power just in general on both sides of the aisle are clinging to power, all the power that they can get for as long as they can get, much to the detriment of those who are going to be coming behind them. The young people who are going to be leading the nation next, I think are at a tremendous disadvantage because of this kind of thing. But that's a podcast episode for another time. But it is something of note that, Joe Biden is not going to be doing a ton of these press conferences, not because he doesn't feel like it, but he's not the star, right? Like he's not the star of the show. In another podcast for another time, I'll explain to you exactly why Kamala Harris will be running on the Democratic ticket in 2024, not Joe Biden. It's kind of obvious when you do the numbers, but that's something that I noticed last night. There's going to be a lot of that, I think, co-presidenting going on in the next couple of years to kind of get Kamala Harris kind of groomed and used to, that position. I think that's not too far out of the question. Let me see. We did get a few comments. Make sure you leave your comments, folks. You can leave them on the Instagram. You can leave them on the Facebook page. However you are listening, that is cool. Leela Star says, awesome. I just subscribed. I didn't know you had a YouTube channel. Yes, we do. A Nichols Worth. Wait, where's my thing here? There we go. A Nichols Worth on YouTube. It's available now. Make sure you go follow and subscribe. Thank you, Leela. I appreciate that. Dave McGowan says, please tell these fools to stop calling this man Moneybag Joe. That's actually leading me into like my next topic of what I want to talk about too, Dave. Always on time. I appreciate you, sir. He also says they aren't going to let that power go easily. I think that we have at least 3 to 5 more presidential elections before the only white man face leaves that office. All right, so 3 to 5 might be a little bit much, assuming that every cycle is 4 years. To say, 12 to 20 years, I'm sorry, 16 to 20 years is a little bit much for that. But I hear what you're saying. Like it does seem like it's going to be a while. I think that the transition between, though, just on that little nugget about Joe Biden kind of looking old, I think that the transition is going to be a lot smoother. I'm sorry, it's not going to be smooth, rather. It's going to be a lot rougher. It's going to be like a ledge where you have the old guard, and then suddenly, boom, you're going to have a new dawn of leadership. And I think that that's good in many ways, but it's bad in that we should have had more of a handoff. I think with our leadership, older leaders should have been more willing and able to groom younger leaders in the Democratic Party. I don't know if that's really happening as much in the Republican Party. Who knows what the Republican Party even is at this point, but that'd be an interesting sort of thing to pay attention to. Leonard Richardson comments in. Appreciate you, Leonard, as always. He says, "Is that why we're going after Cuomo, because they want Kamala to run?" I don't think that those two are necessarily interconnected. I think I don't want to say the fix, but the sort of path to Kamala becoming president in 2024, I think, was paved long before we really knew anything, at least publicly, about the Cuomo allegations. There are a lot of people that wanted, and he's referring to New York State Governor. Almost called him Andrew Cuomo. There you go. And he's obviously in some legal hot water right now. A lot of accusations of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct going on inside his office. A lot of Democrats want him to resign. But I think that Cuomo, for his part in all of this, kind of brought that on himself. I don't know what's true and what's not, but it seems like a fire, like where there's smoke. I always believe that where there's smoke, there's definitely fire. We don't know how big the fire is or what kind of fire, but there is some kind of fire. I think he brought that upon himself. Whereas, Kamala Harris and her sort of path, like I said, to presidency was kind of determined long ago when she was chosen as the running mate. I kind of figured out all of this because I don't think Kamala Harris likes Joe Biden. I don't know if that's like a hot take or whatever, but like, I think if you just, take a couple seconds to kind of look at the two of them, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are not fond of each other. And so this seems to be some sort of pairing that the Democratic Party more so is responsible for, rather than like behind the scenes, Kamala and Joe, like, coming together to squash their differences or to squash their beef. I don't think any of that stuff happened. So just based upon a number of those factors, that's what I kind of lead to. That's what kind of leads me to that idea that I think Kamala is up next. Why not, right? Like, Democrats would love to promote and support a black woman for president. It would make them look like the most diverse and awesome, even-handed people of all time. So just my 2 cents. Make sure you leave your comments in if you're listening to us on Instagram or on Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's on the screen. YouTube.com/A Nicholsworth, or just search A Nicholsworth on YouTube, and we can get to it from there. More thoughts about this Joe Biden press conference, though, from last night, in which he announces all these changes. So I was listening to a black media program today. I enjoy my black media. I think you should support it. I am black media in some weird kind of ways. So I definitely support my peeps. Anyhow, there was an interesting discussion today. Basically the way this kind of went, the anchor was kind of asking the analyst, to save some time here on this. The anchor was asking the analyst, are the $1,400 checks that are coming to Americans, and this is an important one, are the $1,400 checks and the other, sort of added provisions to the unemployment, the extra child tax credit that people are going to be able to claim, is this going to heal serious wounds in the black community? That was kind of one of the questions that came out of this. It was an interesting sort of response. Is $1,400 enough? Because the obvious answer here is no, of course not. $1,400, it could be $14 million. It's not enough to sort of offset and heal, not offset, rather. It's not enough to heal wounds, right? If we're talking about healing wounds in the black community, this is stuff that we know goes all the way back to the advent of slavery, not the advent of slavery, rather, the introduction of slavery to this land in this area of the world, right? Like, that's where the hurt and the pain and the trauma goes back to. And it really is impossible to heal those kinds of wounds here in America for a number of reasons. I don't know. I don't really think they're all that complex, but I think for a number of reasons, the United States cannot give back to the people of the country today what was stolen from them in the last, 300-400 years or so. So no, this stimulus package, right? Like an economic stimulus, which is something totally different than, sort of making up for or healing wounds in the Black community, which is akin to reparations, right? Like the stimulus is different than reparations. And I think what we're talking about here, you just passed a $1.9 trillion stimulus plan. It's the largest, blah, 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 everything else like that in history. But what's significant about this moment is that it is needed for everyone because something struck and something affected everyone pretty much in the same way. Now, we know that obviously Black and brown communities are more vastly affected by the same sort of things that white communities are. We've been over that 1,004 times, right? But all things said, the virus has kind of impacted everyone in a very negative way. And millions of American workers, regardless of color, and people just in general, need help, financial help in this moment. So that's why this is a big deal. It is not a big deal because this is something that is going to suddenly save the Black community or turn around the tide, if you will, in the Black community. That's not what we're talking about here. These are stimulus checks, not reparations checks. I do still believe, obviously, that we are very much so owed, as the people of this country, we are very much so owed reparations. And I'm always, always down and open to have that conversation about how we can make that happen. But I think that we shouldn't conflate these two issues. I've been seeing a lot of criticism like this on Twitter. I've been hearing, a lot of this conversation going back and forth, not just in comment sections and things like that, but in media streams like this, specifically Black media streams where people are saying and discussing, hey, is Joe Biden already less than 2 months into his administration? Is Joe Biden letting us down? Is Joe Biden absconding from his responsibilities that he made, or his promises that he made, rather, during the course of this election? Is Joe Biden that kind of guy already? That's what the questions have sort of turned in many Black circles, if you will. But we can't confuse the two. Yes, we are owed reparations, but what this is an economic stimulus, and it's for everybody, including you as African Americans. Formerly, getting access to funds like this or getting access to help like this has come with a lot of red tape, especially for minorities. Not this time, right? There's going to be, we'll find out, I'm sure, some, backdoor dealings that probably weren't straight later down the line. But for now, as the way that this program is presented, this is a big help. It's a big help for everybody. And a targeted group of people, individuals, poor people in this country, or those without means, oftentimes unfairly represented by African Americans, that group is going to receive a huge boost from this stimulus. But again, there's no amount of money that can balance the wrongs of slavery. That's what we're talking about here whenever we're talking about righting the wrongs. And in that case, of course, the U.S. owes a lot more than $1,400 checks. I am down for getting creative with it. I was speaking to a friend a little bit earlier, and this kind of came up in the conversation about tiered assistance, right? Like, I think everybody needs assistance. If you listen to my last program, I think that this is a perfect time to sort of reintroduce the idea of, guaranteed income, consistent guaranteed income, and things like that for all Americans or many Americans, most Americans, things like that. I think if you implement plans and ideas like that, there's things that you can do, I think, for African Americans and African American families that we know have been railroaded by the system to kind of give them a larger percentage or a larger share of that. That's just one of the ideas, right? But I do think that we can get creative about how we balance this conversation, how we balance the conversation. Let me know what you think in the comment section as well. Dave comments back in. Let me read a few of his comments here. He says, excuse me, again, it went Obama, Black man, to Trump, the white supremacy promotion. That's why I think we are far off. America won't allow the change. I think in some ways, yeah. I think you are right in that, because it's hard to change the hearts and minds of somebody that, just doesn't particularly like a group of people, or they think that a particular group of people is lesser than. It's a much taller mountain to climb than I think some people have made. And it's a struggle that I think we're going to be in for a long time. But also at the same time, Dave, as I've discussed on previous programs, I'm not exactly interested in begging for the approval of other groups of people that can't see me as human. I don't know. I just rather focus my energy and time into something else. Speaking of, let me move on to my next topic here tonight, involving, of course, George Floyd. Now, George Floyd, as you probably know, was killed last May. I believe it was May the 24th or 25th, when Officer Derrick Chauvin knelt on his neck for an extended period of time. I believe it was 9 minutes or somewhere along that amount of time. The event happened on camera and obviously sparked off a wave of protests across the country in his honor, in his name. Even in a year with a story as big and as significant as the pandemic happening, George Floyd's or the reaction to George Floyd's death sent shockwaves everywhere. It was a little bit different a situation than we were typically used to with this, which was interesting to me, because I always said of this situation, of course, this is sad and this is terrible to see, but I mean, we've seen this before. Like 2014, we saw this. We saw this exact same thing on camera when Eric Garner was choked out. Nonetheless, it was a different situation. It was a different political environment. It was a different worldly environment for all that. And the impact of George Floyd's murder last year certainly sent ripples and waves across the entire country in ways that we couldn't get away from. It was inescapable. Well, now the jury selection is going on right now for Derrick Chauvin, the officer who did the dirt right there, the one whose knee was on George Floyd's neck. There were three other officers that were around. They kind of did nothing. We'll see what happens with them. But as for Derrick Chauvin, the one who with his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, this is an important case for a lot of people around the country. It's the results of what we saw, of the process that we saw started last year. Many conversations that sort of spurred from that as well. So that's just a little backstory on that. But anyway, the jury selection for Derrick Chauvin's trial is going on now. It's happening this week. At the same time, we got news today that the family of George Floyd has settled a lawsuit against the city of Minneapolis for $27 million. That's what city officials said today. $27 million. Of course, city council unanimously votes to approve this settlement. The mayor is expected to sign off on it, and $27 million will be going to the family of George Floyd. Now, this is not anything unusual. We've seen this kind of thing happen time and again in cases from Freddie Gray, to Eric Garner and his family, I don't want to go down the line unless you guys get the idea that usually when this happens in a city, the city is responsible for paying the settlement, the amount of money that is due to the family of the victim of what ends up being a horrific action, in many cases resulting in their death. What I thought about this situation whenever I saw this press conference and I see Benjamin Crump, who I cannot stand. I don't know how y'all feel about Benjamin Crump. I personally think he's just the worst, because injustice seems to follow Benjamin Crump wherever he goes. Now, he is seemingly pretty good at this portion that we're talking about today, and that's getting families a monetary sort of award. I hate to even call it that, but for their pain and suffering due to their family member being murdered by a police officer. He seems to be good at recouping the funds, but not really getting justice for his clients. So I'm a little iffy on Benjamin Crump. But anyway, Crump was there today. The entire legal team was there. Some family members of George Floyd were there. And $27 million is a lot of money. Even if you're already $100,000 heir or a millionaire, $27 million is a significant addition to the coffers. It's the largest settlement. I think it's definitely the largest settlement in Minneapolis history, even larger than the woman that was killed by the Minneapolis police officer. I think it was a couple of years ago. I think her family was awarded something like $20 million. Well, now the family of George Floyd now has $27 million from the city as a way of saying, sorry, my bad. This one's on me. Is that what Minneapolis says with this money? I've always felt uncomfortable around these situations, but a few things I guess have to be noted here. First, for the family, if this was something that they wanted to do, if this was something that they pushed for, then by all means, I think that, we should let them alone. We should let them get their money. That's their right to seek these kind of damages in this country. It's their legal right to do so. And I don't know what the family is going to do with this money, or if the family is actually, somewhat, I don't want to say satisfied, but if they're somewhat healed, so to speak, from this process with this $27 million. I mean, that's a lot of healing, right? $27 million. But without putting on the tinfoil hat and going into la la land of conspiracies, I do think that in these moments, the timing of these settlements oftentimes and what ends up becoming of the criminal trial later down the line are not totally disconnected, right? I'm not saying that the money that oftentimes is given away or is given out as a part of the civil reward here, if you will, somewhat thwarts the criminal side of things, or it thwarts actual justice from being served just because they gave them all this money. I'm not saying that. But the interesting timing of everything kind of makes you zero in and say, what's really the purpose of these large lawsuits like this? Because on this same day that we heard, of course, that $27 million was headed to the family of George Floyd, Minnesota Judge Peter Cahill approved the prosecution's request. Now, this is talking about the criminal trial. The judge in that case approved the prosecution's request to reinstate a third-degree murder charge against Derrick Chauvin. The former Minneapolis police officer had additionally been charged with second-degree murder and manslaughter in the killing of George Floyd. Now, the big deal about that is now the prosecution has basically a lower tier thing on the legal totem pole, I guess, to charge Derrick Chauvin with, right? Like second-degree murder, I'm no legal expert here, and people can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but second-degree murder pretty much is like, third-degree murder is pretty much like, oops. Like I was doing something and it resulted in your death. I didn't mean to do anything. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to harm you, but my actions resulted in your death. Like that's the way that I look at the definition of third-degree murder. That's not that bad, honestly. Like third-degree murder, that could happen anything. You could be like playing around with broomsticks in your living room and hit somebody in a major artery accidentally and kill them. You weren't trying to hurt or harm anyone. You were just playing around in the living room, but you so happened to end someone's life, right? That's not that bad. When you step it up and when you think about second-degree murder, right? Like second-degree murder, there's an element there of intent. There's an element of I was trying to do something to you. I tried to inflict harm against you or on you. Okay, and what my actions of me trying to inflict harm on you resulted in your death, right? That's a big difference. Second degree, third degree, right? A huge difference. And so in addition to the, much less jail time that Derrick Chauvin would serve if he was charged with a third-degree murder instead of second degree, in addition to that, throughout the annals of history, what the records will say is that the Minneapolis Police Department, through the actions of former officer Derrick Chauvin, said that he was simply doing his job. Third-degree murder says he was simply doing his job, and something went wrong during the process that resulted in someone's death. And the important distinction here between saying that and saying Officer Derrick Chauvin of the Minneapolis Police Department intended to inflict harm on George Floyd, and in inflicting that harm, he killed George Floyd. The difference between those two stories could potentially be the difference in whether or not something actually gets done, at least for the Minneapolis Police Department, from here moving forward. That's a question I have to ask myself. $27 million or not? What happens after this case? Is America a safer place? Are police officers more aware of the damage that they are doing or that they could be doing to African-American men and women across the country, black and brown people across the country? Are they aware of this damage that they are doing, and are they motivated to stop? That's the difference between second degree and third degree. It might seem like a subtle sort of thing that this judge is kind of throwing in here at the end of the jury selection process. And who cares, right? So long as Derrick Chauvin ends up in jail. No, this distinction is important. If Derrick Chauvin walks away from this thing and people look at him as an officer who was just doing his job, nothing will change. If they look at him as an officer who definitely has a job to do, but didn't have to do that, didn't have to take that action, but he did anyway and then killed a man, that is a much more pertinent sort of lesson to be learned from all of this. I'm not saying that the $27 million and the introduction of these third-degree murder charges are necessarily connected, so to speak. But if there's been any family, if there's anyone who is at the center of things like this, when the police take a life too soon, right, or they unfairly treat somebody and they kill them, right, the family of the victim, the immediate family of the victim, they kind of become the de facto leaders of the quote unquote movement. Granted, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people probably poured into the streets last summer in his honor and in his name. But the family of the victim is kind of the de facto leader of the movement. And if the family says after this, there was a statement from his brother, George Floyd's brother, Rodney Floyd, and I think that this kind of summed it up very well. At the press conference, Rodney said, "This agreement is a necessary step for all of us to begin to get some closure. George's legacy for those who loved him will always be his spirit of optimism that things can get better. And we hope this agreement does just that it makes things a little better in Minneapolis and holds up a light for communities around the country." Already kind of sounds like the Floyd family is willing to move on from this whole thing, given this settlement. And as I said, if they would like to do that, I think they should. And I think they should be allowed to. And I don't think that we should criticize them for that. They just got $27 million dumped into their lap. What would you do with $27 million dumped into your lap? It's a tough question to think about because it's not going to happen to 99% of you. And thankfully, given the reason they got it, you're lucky that you don't have that payment coming to you. But this is their situation. They're going to do with it what they want. But it's understandable that if the energy, the sort of fervor that could be felt if this criminal trial does not end up in second-degree murder charges for Derrick Chauvin, who clearly intended hurt and harm and danger to Mr. Floyd on camera for 9 minutes. If those second-degree murder charges don't stick, guess who's going to be at the front of the line telling everyone to remain calm during a moment like this? That's right, the Floyd family. And what's their motivation to remain calm and to keep everything calm? Well, there's 27 million of them in their bank account now. Money can't fix, as I mentioned earlier in the program, money cannot correct wrongs, civil injustices that have happened in the country that promises those kind of freedoms for every citizen. You cannot correct that with money, but it sure does help. It sure does make a difference in what actually ends up happening and not happening in these particular cases. Interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Of course, you can hit us up on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're streaming 4 different places tonight. And make sure you subscribe, especially on our YouTube page. Make sure you subscribe. Talking a little bit about George Floyd. The settlement money going to his family is $27 million. My estimation is, I don't know, something a little funny about that being on the same day or within the same week that the judge has also offered the prosecution a lesser charge for Derrick Chauvin. Let's go back to the comment section. Dave's back. He says, "I would rather live and earn $100,000 than die and have my daughter live without her father and with shame, and 100 million. Right. You know, there's no amount of money. I agree with you, Dave. And that's what makes it scary, right? Like these moments are sort of billed almost as, you know, a piece of America saying, we're sorry. Listen, the whole thing with your boy George was totally messed up. There's no way that he should have been shot and killed. So here's some money. And that's kind of like the nice, neat little story that would, you know, that Minneapolis, that Minnesota, that the United States would love to wrap this up in. Something bad happened. We gave the family some money. We settled. It's all settled legally now. We can move on. The trauma of everyone else who's still here living with this moment is much greater than any amount of money. However, the money can certainly make it seem like it's a closed loop. 27 million is a lot of money. Leela comments in and says, yeah, they gave Eric G family a settlement and then they let the cop off easy. Like likely here also ? Yeah. I don't see Derrick Chauvin. I don't see him doing any serious time, any sort. I mentioned this to my mom a little bit earlier when we were talking about this, and I said, unfortunately, you know, Derrick Chauvin hasn't made whatever amount of time he's going to spend in prison. It's not going to be long. He's going to get out. He's going to have everything provided for him. Anywhere that he goes, and he's going to have to go to specific places, but anywhere that he goes, Derrick Chauvin's going to have things taken care of for him. People are going to pay for his meals. People are going to buy him a new truck. People are going to buy him this, that, and the third. They are. It happened with George Zimmerman. It happened with the officer that shot and killed Michael Brown, whose name is escaping. Michael something along those lines. Jeez, it's been so long. I can't even think of his name right now. Michael Slager? No, Michael Slager is actually the one that actually is in jail. But anyway, the point being, you can go back with these officers and you can kind of see the reaction, what has happened to these officers afterwards. And it's like these guys almost live better lives, save for like being able to show their face in public, which isn't that big of a deal. I think for a lot of these people, it's really a shame. So if the officers have no motivation against this, then they're going to continue to do the same thing. Going back on the creative sort of funding strategies and practices, one of the things that we haven't really considered, because we've talked about things like defund the police in response to this, and I've talked about the fallacies of that argument and how it kind of gets confused, but it's a good idea, right? But it just has to be kind of executed differently. Well, this is one of the ways it could be executed, right? If the police departments themselves were at least in part responsible for these settlements, and footing the bill for these settlements, maybe there's at least a little bit of a financial, because there'd be financial responsibility behind it. Maybe that's a sort of interesting give and take, a compromise. We can, you know, if what you want to do by defunding the police, quote unquote, is punish the police for bad behavior, well, this is just a wide open door to do that. If these settlements are going to be coming out, they're paying millions of dollars. By the way, the citizens and their tax dollars of the citizens of Minneapolis are paying this settlement, not, you know, the officers or the mayor's office or whatever. That's the real tragic part of this, is that nobody, you know, it's like, you know, I punch someone in the face, but my friend gets punished for me punching somebody in the face. What's my motivation for not punching somebody in the face again? This my friend got punished, not me. So I think things like that we have to be a little bit more creative on. I think the story of Eric Garner, it makes me so sad every time. Daniel Pantaleo's out there walking around free as a bird. Free as a bird. He was on camera, but who cares? Yeah, Dave comments back and he says the intent, speak on it. Yeah, the intent's important. You know, second degree, third degree, huge step. He also says that puts a price tag on Black lives when life is priceless. So in wrapping up, you know, this portion of the conversation, it's like, I always like to see results. Like what's going to come of this? After this settlement, after this trial, I am not very confident that as impactful as this case was, during the summer of 2020. As much as life seemed to sort of stop, the NBA, the MLB, the major companies and corporations kind of coming to their knees and saying, we need to address this. As all of that momentum sort of built up last year, it brought us to this moment, or it's bringing us to this moment that's coming up in a few months, likely, when this trial is done. And that's a very disappointing sort of result for this. Minneapolis's police department was never dismantled, even though the city council voted on that initially. Never came back around to anything. Other police departments seem to sort of flinch at this. There was some legislation that was passed across the country in different states banning, it might be nationwide, banning chokeholds and knees to the neck and things like that. I mean, just soft stuff, right? Like, who cares about any of this? Do I feel, as a Black person, I can speak from personal experience on this, but as a Black person, do I feel safer now walking out after this incident? Do I feel like officers are going to value my life higher whenever I go outside? Or not just officers, but anybody? Do I feel like that the people who don't look like me are going to value my life at where it should be valued after this case? No, I don't. In short, no. Maybe the next case. I hate to sound pessimistic, but it's going to happen again. And so maybe the next one will get this right. Who knows? Maybe we won't have as many legislative hangups and yellow-bellied people in Congress that are so scared about losing funding that they don't attack the people who are necessary. Maybe. Just a thought. Final comment. Leela says 27 million should have been more like 10 to 15 million for the family and the rest of the NAACP Urban League. No offense, but the family doesn't look like they would. Question mark. I mean, I don't know. All the money. I'm fine with all the money going to the family. I don't know about the money going to the NAACP. That might be just as useless as throwing it into a pit. But I would say, though, on that issue, that if a part of these settlements and a part of this payment out, if you will, is intended on making things better for future generations or future people, at least within the city of Minneapolis, then there should have been some sort of community reinvestment with that money. This is just my own 2 cents. I think that there should have been some community reinvestment with that money. Yes. But not through the NAACP. I think that'd be a very bad idea. All right. I'm getting out of here. That's all the time I got for tonight. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. YouTube.com/A Nicholsworth, Spotify, Anchor, Facebook, all those places are where you can find archived episodes of A Nicholsworth. I want to shout out our sponsor tonight, of course, Parkour Therapy. You can go to parkourtherapy.com for more information at the bottom of the screen. You'll check out a brand new ticker for Parkour Plus launching. It's actually already launched. Bunch of cool stuff coming up this summer. Workouts from home that you can do from your phone or from your computer. Excuse me. I'm already subscribed. I think it's really cool. I don't even like working out. But Parkour Plus, sort of the Netflix of workouts. That's the way I like to look at it. You can check it out now at parkourtherapy.com. Free subscription is awaiting you there. Take 7 days, get yourself in shape, all that good stuff. So shout out to Parkour Therapy for sponsoring the show tonight. I will be back on Monday for a fresh edition of A Nicholsworth. Send me stories, send me chats, send me friend requests at Keaton D. Nichols on Instagram and Twitter, as you can see at the bottom of your screen. And I will see you